Hey, I'm Madison Mary. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have my best contemporary of 2020. Like, are they all contemporary? Hi, I'm Madison Mary. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have the best non-fantasy books of 2020. So I really don't know what I'm going to call this video. I'm basically making a video that's like the best fantasy I read of 2020 and then the best everything else that I read of 2020. And so this is the everything else video. I read a lot more contemporary and romances and everything like that this year than ever before. Normally I read 50% fantasy, and this year it was only like 30-something%. And so clearly I needed to make something else to show everyone all these other amazing books that I read. Basically the only rank that actually is like its rank is my #1 rank. Everything else is kind of just, you know, these are the other 9 books I really loved, and I think that if you haven't read them, read them. So we're gonna start with number 10, I guess, and that is The Lost by Natasha Preston. This is one of the best thrillers I read this year, and it is a YA thriller. Natasha Preston isn't for everyone, but she's definitely for me. In my opinion, this is her best one to date. I've read all of her books, and I'm very excited for her upcoming one this year. She writes YA thrillers that are set in the UK. Listen to them on audiobook. I highly recommend them. That was how I've listened to all of hers, and they're just so much fun. So in The Lost we follow 2 girls, and they have been realizing that people have started to go missing around their town and around like the neighboring towns. And so they start to look into it, and then they end up meeting these 2 guys. And these 2 guys end up being like, hey, like, let's hang out. And they end up saying yes. And then they end up getting into his car. Never get into a stranger's car. And then they end up basically being kidnapped by these 2 guys. And then they find out that these 2 guys are the ones that have been kidnapping people across the towns. They're like in their mid-20s. And what they do with these people, that these teenagers that they kidnap, I think they're all like 17 years old, all of them. They end up getting put into this like facility, which is like 1 room and then a hallway, and they keep them there and they watch them and they make them do these like torture tasks. They like torture them in one of these individual, it's really crazy. I mean, like, if you're gonna go into Natasha Preston, maybe don't start with her best one, but if you're only ever gonna read one of her books, read this one. It is so good. I would easily reread it. It is just, they're crazy. They all are. But a fair warning, all of her thrillers have an open ending, so if you don't like that, be warned. They all have an open ending. All of them. Number 9 is going to be American Royals. I read this specifically for a vlog last year, where I read one of my best friend Soleil from Little Readers Corner's favorite books. I think actually 2 of the books I read for her vlog are in this video, because clearly she has taste. So if you don't know her, check her out. But American Royals is one of the books I read because of her, and oh my god, did I fall in love with this. It is a contemporary romance, but you have to imagine that if George Washington didn't become the first president of the United States, but instead the first king, and then we follow his descendants years later. So there are 3 siblings. So we have Princess Beatrice, and she is the eldest daughter, and she is set to become the first queen of America. They've always been kings. It's always been passed down to the male descendant, but this is the first time that the eldest daughter is getting the chance to become the queen. So there's a lot of pressure placed upon her, and her family expects her to get married, but she's actually in love with her bodyguard. Then we follow Princess Samantha. She is a twin with Prince Jefferson, and Prince Jefferson's actually like the golden child. America loves him. He's like their sweetheart. Samantha's like the wild child. She's the one that no one expects anything of. She's kind of really belittled in society. She kind of feels like she's the spare heir, you know. She's next in line for the throne if her sister, something happens to her. Then we follow Nina, and Nina is not a royal or not nobility either. She's Princess Samantha's best friend, but she's actually in love with Prince Jefferson, but the 2 of them kind of have this very unrequited love. So we follow Nina, and the last PV we follow is Daphne, who is Prince Jefferson's ex-girlfriend, and she was America's sweetheart. Everyone loved Daphne with Jefferson. Society still loves Daphne. She's nobility, and she is determined to do anything to become Jefferson's girlfriend again and become a princess. Becoming a princess is her goal in life, and she doesn't care who she has to hurt to get there. I really loved all 4 of our POVs. There were really no times where I found them boring. I'd say Nina was probably the weakest in this, but everyone else I was in love with. I mean, there's a bodyguard romance, there's also a forbidden romance kind of as well, and it's really good. Then we have The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I listened to this on audiobook. If you're gonna listen to this or read it, audiobook is the way. So we follow Xiomara, and she is very passionate about spoken word poetry, and this whole book is written in spoken word poetry, and it's basically her coming of age story, and it is very poignant, and it's about her kind of having all these expectations put upon her. You know, she's a female, she's Latina, and kind of how society views her in a certain way. You know, she has to make herself smaller even though she's got such a big voice. And it's about her struggling with her relationship with God, because her mother is very God-centric. You know, her mum's like, God, this and that, like, gotta go to church. And Xiomara she's questioning her relationship to God. And there's so much to this book. And I think that if you are a fan of contemporary coming of age stories, this is definitely the #1 book you have to read, because it is phenomenal. Like, this book should be in like schools to read, because I think it'd be great, and I think it speaks a lot to the struggles you go with. Even if you don't identify with everything that Xiomara goes under, you do identify with different parts of her in different ways, especially when it comes to being a woman and being sexualized. That's a huge part of this, and I definitely understood a lot of that. Then we have one of my favorites, which I talk about all the time, and that is The Tourist Attraction by Sarah Morgan Thaler, specifically actually Mistletoe Mr. Right. I don't know which one of these I prefer more. This is book 1, this is book 2. This is a romance series. These are adult books, so there are like steamy scenes in them, but they both came out this year, which is honestly amazing that Sarah Morgan Thaler like managed to put out 2 books this year. I adore them both. We follow this fictional town called Moose Springs, which is in Alaska, and it is a town where the townspeople absolutely hate all the tourists that come, because there's this very prominent resort that every year like very rich people come to, and the townspeople just hate them. They don't like them. And we follow one of those townspeople, Graham, and he owns this diner called the Tourist Trap, and he named it that for shits and giggles. He was like, I'm gonna call it this, but like I actually hate tourists. And then we follow, what's her name? Zoe Cladwell, and she has always dreamed of going on a trip to Alaska. She thinks it's been her like one destination she's always wanted to go to, and she finally saved up enough money to go. And when she gets there, she ends up meeting Graham, and it's their romance, and I love it. And there's also a dog. He has a dog, and the dog is blind, and I love it. I love him so much. It's such a great book. I know that this is definitely a hit on this series. I have found that people either freaking adore it to pieces like me, or they don't care for it. It's like a 2-3 star. Like for some reason, there's no middle ground for people who read this series, and I don't know why that is, but yeah. Then we have Damaged Goods by Talia Hibbert. This is a book I read in December, and it just like knocked everything out of the park. It was like #1. If it's still free on Kindle, please buy it. Like, you will not regret this. It is a second chance romance, and our MC is actually pregnant. And normally those are 2 things that I hate. I'm not normally a second chance romance person because I'm very picky about them, and I hate when our female protagonist is pregnant, because normally it's like really stupid the reasons why, but she's pregnant before this whole starts. So our female protagonist, she is in an abusive marriage, verbally and physically abusive. And when she falls pregnant, she's like, you know what, I have to get out of this. And so she ends up running away to this coastal town that she visited when she was a kid. And when she gets there, she ends up bumping into her childhood crush, her unrequited sweetheart. And they dated for 6 weeks when she was a teenager during the summer, and then they never met again. And they bump into each other. It's their romance as they kind of fall back in love with one another, and I absolutely loved it. There is a lot of trauma. There's a lot of talk about her being in her abusive marriage, so do be aware of that. I bawled my eyes out. It hit me in my core so hard, and I was just torn apart by everything that she underwent. And also the romance between them is really hot. Like, you would not expect pregnant sex to be that hot, but damn, it was. Then we have Felix Ever After by Kacen Callada. I love this. This was like one of my favorites of the year. Of course it's in my favorites of the year. But I adored the crap out of this book so much. I blew through it. We follow Felix Love, and he is a trans male, but you know, he's never actually been in love. He ends up actually getting fully outed by this person in an art project who ends up displaying what they looked like before they ended up transitioning, and also their dead name. And it was just an awful thing that they underwent. And then they started getting these anonymous texts of someone who is just being blatantly transphobic, and they're just really struggling to undergo with all this stuff going on in their life. And then they start to think that they know who the person is that's sending the transphobic messages, and then tries to actually trick that person into falling in love with them in order to then sabotage them. So There is a lot of toxic interactions in this novel, and I think a big part of this is Felix realizing that, you know, the way that he's dealing with all these things going on isn't healthy. And a big part of this book is Felix coming into his identity, because he does also really struggle with realizing, am I trans? Like, do I want to be called he, him? Do I want to be called them, they? Like, what is my actual identity? And that's a huge part of this. And I think that it was just an amazing exploration, and I absolutely adored it. Then we have Devil in Spring, which is by ɪḻsᴛᴏᴏᴅ. This is the first ɪḻsᴛᴏᴏ I ever read. It is book 3 in the Ravenel series, and I normally don't read my romances out of order, but I did read specific historical romances for a video where I read my favorite romance booktubers' favorite historical romances. This was one of them. And oh my stars, did I fall in love with this book. Like 1000%, I adored it. Like, the very beginning is a little prologue, which is following the parents, which were in a previous ɪḻsᴛᴏᴏ's book called Devil in Winter. And as soon as I read like the parents like interacting for like 3 pages, I was like, I need this book. I'm in love with them. I barely know them and I love them. But Devil in Spring. So we follow Pandora Ravenel. She is one of the Ravenel sisters, and she has no plans of getting married. She doesn't want to get married because she wants to start her own business. She has all these plans to make these board games, and she does not want any of her ideas, any of her profits, any of her company to be taken over by her husband when she gets married. The only problem is that when she's at this one party, she ends up getting stuck in a compromising situation. And then Gabriel, who is Lord St. Vincent, ends up finding her when she's stuck, and he tries to help her out. The only problem is that as he's helping her out of this compromising stuck position, they end up getting seen by people, and it looks like they're doing some stuff. So as a result, people say, hey, Gabriel, like, you should probably, you know, court her, marry her, because you kind of ruined her reputation. And he's like, oh my god, no, because he's a notorious rake. And Pandora's like, haha, no, because I don't want to be in a marriage. And then their 2 families end up going on vacation together, and they end up actually falling in love. And that's what this is about. And I absolutely adored it, because the whole time Pandora is she sticks to her guns. She's very feminist. She's very about, you know, I am more than happy to, you know, fall in love, but I refuse to actually marry. Like, that is what I'm sticking by. These are my reasons why, and I'm not moving for anyone. And Gabriel ends up being such a soft sweetheart and like a cinnamon roll, because he just completely falls head over heels for her, and he's like, I will do anything for you. Like, I understand, like, you want your autonomy, like, you want to have like your own things going on, but like, I also, like, I love you, like, I want to protect you, like, I will do anything for you, and I love them. I love them together so much. I will admit that there is, like, a massive tone shift towards, like, the last third of this book, and some people don't like it, some people do. I loved it. It sets up for the next book in this series, and I'm obsessed. Then we have Red, White, and Royal Blue. Ha ha ha. Yeah, this is the other book from Soleil that I read. I should have known this was always going to be, like, a favorite of mine. But I read it, and I devoured it, and I was in love with it, and I really should probably reread it, because I know a lot of people do reread this book and find it even more fun each and every time, but it is adult. If you're not aware of what this book is about, like, I don't even know, like, why I should be telling you. But, you know, I'm not going to judge you, just slightly, if you haven't heard of this book. But this follows a Prince of England and the first son of the United States, and it's their romance where they end up kind of getting into a fight publicly, and then both sides of their family end up forcing them to pretend to be friends in front of the cameras and make them have like a friendship. But from this friendship, they actually end up falling in love. And then there's a lot of talk because they're both in the public eye, because they're both, you know, supposed to produce for the prince's sake heirs, and it's the whole idea of, you know, like, how do we be openly gay? We have our own commitments to our countries, but how do we commit to ourselves as well? And I loved it. I loved it. Are we surprised? No. This is adult in content, FYI, like, sexist scenes happen in this book, and yes. Here we only have 2 books left. The first of which is going to be Staggered by Toby McSmith. I read this during the summer, and I fell in love with it. So we follow Pony and Georgia. Pony is a trans male. He has just moved to a new school, and he is passing. He doesn't plan on being out at this new school. He just wants to be treated for his senior year as a boy. And then we follow Georgia, and she is part of the cheer team. She starts making friends with Pony, and they start actually falling in love, and The only problem is that, you know, Pony is keeping secret that he is trans, and that's kind of what this is about. We do follow both POVs. I will admit I didn't love George's POV as much, but it did speak a lot about how society views passing trans males and also falling in love with someone and not being sure like what that means to you. Because I do know there are people out there who are like, well, what does it mean if I'm attracted to a trans male or trans female? Like, what does that mean about me? And like, it doesn't really mean anything. Like, they're still like a male or a female, like how they present is who they are. But like, a lot of people start to wonder, like, what does that mean for me? And like, what does it mean for my own sexuality and things like that? So there are a lot of different topics in this. I will warn you right now that there is blatant homophobia, blatant transphobia. There is violence against trans people in this, and it is very hard to read. So I do want to warn you against that. So do be aware, but ultimately I really did adore this story, and it is one of my favorites that I read this year. If you followed me from the beginning of 2020, you'll know this is obviously going to be on this list, but if you are new here, Beartown by Frederick Backman is the #1 book I read last year. It's like number 3 or 4 on like my top books of 2020, but it's like the top non-fantasy book I read last year. Hands down, like it's not even funny how much I love this book. It was the very first book I ever annotated with a like physically without tabs, like with a highlighter, like, you know what I mean. And I cried like a child. I have a vlog where I read this book and fell completely in love with it, so I highly recommend that vlog if you don't mind seeing me cry. If you're new to my channel, I do cry. I'm a human. Get over it. But this book was amazing, and I'm really sad I haven't continued on with the next book. And it's not like it's a companion, basically, that takes place like years and years after this one. But without giving too much away, because I do think this book is best to go into without knowing too much about the plot, but it takes place in a fictional town called Beartown, and they're kind of located in the middle of nowhere. They are surrounded by a forest, and the nearest actual town is like miles away. And this is a town where they make most of their profit from hockey, specifically the boys hockey team at the high school and middle school levels. And we follow basically this town and the people who are in it. We follow multiple POVs, and basically it's a massive coming of age story for all these different people living in this town, kind of realizing that, you know, they put a lot of pressure on these boys to perform a certain way, but not only that, but they also elevate them to such a high level that these boys who are part of the hockey team kind of think that they're invincible. And there is rape in this book that is a poignant part of this storyline, and also about how when you live in such a town, you don't know, like, can you speak out about it when they're such prized people? And if you do speak out about it, like, what are they going to think about you? Will anything actually ever be done? And there's also racism in this. There's literally so many different problems that are addressed in this book, and it's just so beautifully written, and you really feel like you have become a part of this community. This book makes you feel like you live in Beartown. You feel like you know who each of these people are, the parents, you feel like you know who the grandparents are, the teachers, the students, everyone you get to know in this book. And it's not even difficult to track everyone. Like, there are so many characters, so many people that you follow, but I didn't have a problem knowing who everyone was. I will admit that like the first couple of chapters, I was kind of struggling a little bit, but you definitely grasp everything by the end of the book, and you definitely know who everyone is and what's going on. So I really recommend this book. If you are able to handle such tough topics, I would definitely say this is like the #1 book from this that you have to take away. And yeah, those are my top 10 non-fantasy books of 2020. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down below what some of your favorites were of 2020. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button down below. If you want to see more of me, please subscribe to my channel. And until next time, thanks a bunch. Bye!